Valentina Mendez adjusted her Prada sunglasses as she walked along the cobblestone pavement of downtown Chicago. The aroma of the gourmet coffee she had just enjoyed still lingered in her senses, mingling with the French perfume she wore. Her Christian Louboutin heels echoed on the ground, marking each step with the same precision with which she conducted her professional life. In front of the traditional Aurora Cafe, where she had just wrapped up a preliminary meeting with potential investors, Valentina checked her Cartier watch. She had exactly 45 minutes to get to the Maxwell Agro-Industrial office, where she would present her proposal to take over the marketing management position. It was her big chance to make a leap in her career, and she knew she was more than prepared. At 35, Valentina had built a solid reputation in the advertising market. Graduating with honors from the University of Chicago with an MBA in marketing from the London Business School, she had accumulated successful cases and an enviable network. Her life was guided by the relentless pursuit of excellence, and this was reflected in every detail, from her meticulously chosen wardrobe to her penthouse decorated by a renowned architect in the Gold Coast. While typing a message on her latest model iPhone, she didn't notice a man approaching from the opposite direction. The collision was inevitable. Valentina felt the impact and instinctively held onto her Hermes bag tightly, as if the stranger could be a threat. "Watch where you're going," she exclaimed, regaining her balance and checking her clothes to make sure they hadn't been stained. "People like you should be more careful not to get in others' way." The man in front of her had an appearance that completely contrasted with the refined environment of the financial district. He wore a simple plaid shirt, faded jeans, and a straw hat that had seen better days. In his hands he carried a bag with what appeared to be agricultural products. His eyes, however, emanated a disconcerting serenity. Instead of responding to Valentina's hostility, he simply nodded slightly, in a gesture that mixed respect and wisdom. Without saying a word, he stepped aside and continued on his way, leaving Valentina with a look of disdain on her perfectly lined lips. "These country folks coming to the city," she murmured, adjusting her Armani blazer and resuming her walk toward the parking lot where her Mercedes awaited. During the drive to Maxwell, Valentina focused on mentally reviewing her presentation. The company was one of the largest in the American agribusiness sector, with billions in annual revenue and a presence across the entire production chain. Taking over the marketing management position would mean not only a significantly higher salary, but also the possibility of international exposure. The Maxwell building was an impressive architectural feat. Completely covered in mirrored glass, it reflected the Chicago sky like a giant crystal. Valentina parked her car in the visitor's spot and checked her appearance one last time in the mirror. Perfect as always. At the reception, she was greeted with deference. Maxwell had a strict punctuality policy, and she had arrived exactly 15 minutes early, enough time for a final touch-up of her lipstick and a brief visualization of the success that was to come. "Miss Mendez," called an elegant secretary, "please follow me to the meeting room." The walk through the company's hallways revealed a sophisticated yet welcoming environment. On the walls, artistic photographs displayed rural and urban landscapes, clearly conveying the integration that Maxwell promoted between the countryside and the city. As she entered the meeting room, Valentina immediately noticed that something was different. The room was filled with a heavy silence, and everyone present maintained an air of extreme respect. Her eyes quickly scanned the faces until they landed on the central figure at the table. Her heart skipped a beat. Sitting at the head of the table, now wearing an impeccable Italian suit, was the same man she had bumped into earlier. The straw hat had been replaced by a discreet and well-groomed haircut, but his eyes, those serene eyes, were unmistakable. "Good morning, everyone," he said in a firm voice that carried the same tranquility as his gaze. "Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our candidate for the marketing manager position. I'm sure she has much to contribute to our company, as long as she learns that a person's true value isn't in the clothes they wear or the car they drive." Valentina felt the blood drain from her face. Her legs wobbled slightly, and she discreetly leaned on the table to maintain her composure. For the first time in many years, she was completely speechless. The man stood up, adjusting his jacket in an elegant and natural gesture. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Gabriel Oliver, the new CEO of Maxwell. I've spent the last 5 years personally overseeing our operations in the field, learning every aspect of our business from the ground up. Now, I'm taking full leadership of the company, and one of my main missions will be to ensure that our team understands and practices the values that have brought us this far. He paused meaningfully, his eyes meeting Valentina's. Respect, humility, and the awareness that every person, regardless of their position or appearance, deserves to be treated with dignity. The silence in the room was absolute. Valentina felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her as her mind tried to process the surreal turn of events. All her preparation, all her meticulous planning for the interview now seemed insignificant in the face of the lesson fate had presented her. At that moment, a crystal-clear certainty formed in her mind. Her life was about to change drastically, and not just professionally. The universe, with its peculiar irony, had chosen that day to teach her that success and power go far beyond appearances. The meeting was just beginning, but Valentina already knew that that morning would mark the start of a profound transformation in her life. What she didn't yet realize was that this would only be the first chapter of a story that would change not only her worldview, but also her heart. Valentina adjusted herself in the meeting room chair, trying to regain control of her emotions. Her fingers, usually steady when holding a Mont Blanc pen, trembled slightly as she opened her presentation folder. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional clinking of coffee cups being served. Gabriel Oliver maintained a serene posture as he reviewed some documents in front of him. There was no trace of vengeance or malicious satisfaction in his expression, just a quiet determination that somehow made the situation even more challenging for Valentina. "Well, everyone," Gabriel began, addressing the team present, "today we won't just have a marketing presentation. We'll have an opportunity to reflect on the values that built Maxwell. Miss Mendes, please show us your vision for the future of our company." Valentina took a deep breath. Years of experience in important presentations kicked in automatically. Her carefully modulated tone filled the room as she began to present her ideas. Charts, numbers, and strategies flowed precisely from her lips, but for the first time in her career, she felt like something was missing. As we can see, she pointed to a slide showing market trends. There's a growing interest among urban consumers in knowing the origin of agricultural products. My proposal is to create a campaign that bridges the gap between the countryside and the city, Gabriel interrupted gently. "But tell me, Miss Mendes, how much time have you spent on a farm? Have you ever spoken with our producers? Do you know the hands that plant what ends up on American tables?" The question hit Valentina like a well-aimed blow. In 15 years of a marketing career, she had created campaigns for various agricultural products, but she had never set foot on a farm. Her knowledge of agribusiness came from reports, research, and statistical data. "Mr. Oliver, I assure you that my experience in digital marketing and branding—" "I don't doubt your technical competence," Gabriel interrupted again, still maintaining a cordial tone. "But Maxwell isn't just a company. It's a family that extends across thousands of acres of American land. Our values aren't just words in a corporate manual. They're daily practices that start in the field and reach all the way here." At that moment, the door to the room opened, and a woman in her 60s entered carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cookies. She wore a simple company uniform, and her face radiated natural kindness. "Excuse me, Mr. Oliver," she said with a warm smile. "I brought that coffee you like, made the way they do in Kansas." "Mrs. Zeta," Gabriel exclaimed, immediately standing up to help her with the tray. "Everyone, this is Josephine Zeta, one of the most important people at Maxwell. She's been with us for 30 years and knows more about the soul of this company than any financial report could ever show." Valentina watched, stunned, the interaction between the powerful CEO and the simple cafeteria worker. The way he treated her with genuine respect and affection was a living lesson in what he had spoken about values. "Mrs. Zeta," Gabriel continued, "do you remember when I started here, 15 years ago as an intern?" The woman laughed, her eyes sparkling with the memory. "How could I forget, Mr. Oliver? You were so skinny, always asking for extra coffee on inventory mornings, but always polite, always with a smile on your face. I could already tell you'd go far." Valentina felt something strange in her chest. A mix of shame and admiration began to replace her initial discomfort. The story unfolding before her was unlike anything she had ever experienced in the corporate world. "Everyone," Gabriel addressed the group. Again, Maxwell grew and became a powerhouse in agribusiness, not just because of marketing strategies or financial reports. "We grew because we understood that every person, from the farmer who plants our first seed to Mrs. Zeta, who serves us coffee, is fundamental to our mission." He paused significantly, his eyes meeting Valentina's. "That's why I have a different proposal for you, Miss Mendez. Before taking on the marketing manager position, I'd like you to spend a month getting to know our operations, starting from the basics, experiencing the reality of our employees at all levels." Valentina's heart raced. A month away from her perfectly organized life, away from the comfort of her air-conditioned office. The idea seemed absurd, yet something in the way Gabriel handled the situation prevented her from immediately refusing. "And if I accept?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Then you'll have the opportunity to develop not just a marketing campaign, but a true understanding of what Maxwell represents," Gabriel replied. "You'll start tomorrow at 5 a.m., accompanying Mrs. Zeta in her routine." A murmur of surprise swept through the room. Valentina felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her once again. Her calculating mind began listing all the reasons she should refuse the absurd proposal, her commitments, her packed schedule, her carefully planned routine. But there was something else, something she couldn't ignore. A growing curiosity about the man who had turned an unpleasant encounter into a life lesson. An inexplicable desire to understand how someone could move so naturally between a straw hat and an Italian suit, between the simplicity of the countryside and the power of skyscrapers. "I accept," she finally said, her voice betraying a mix of determination and uncertainty. Gabriel smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. "Great. Mrs. Zeta, please show Miss Mendez where we keep the uniforms." As she followed the older woman through Maxwell's hallways, Valentina felt she was about to embark on a journey that would change much more than her career. Her Louboutin heels echoed on the marble floor, marking the last steps of a Valentina who, she was beginning to realize, urgently needed transformation. What she didn't yet know was that this month wouldn't just be a professional test, but a rediscovery of values she had long forgotten. And that Gabriel Oliver, with his quiet wisdom and penetrating gaze, would be much more than a demanding boss. He would be the catalyst for a change her heart secretly longed for. The alarm went off at 4 a.m., jolting Valentina from her sleep. For the first time in years, she hesitated before getting up. Her body, accustomed to waking at 7 a.m., protested. In the closet of her penthouse, she ignored her designer clothes and put on the simple Maxwell uniform Mrs. Zeta had given her the day before. Looking at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The sturdy fabric of the uniform replaced her usual designer outfits. Her hair, normally styled with expensive products, was tied back in a simple bun. No elaborate makeup, just the basics to maintain a professional appearance. At 4:45 a.m., her Mercedes parked in Maxwell's underground garage. The building, which during the day buzzed with executives, was almost deserted. At the reception, only a sleepy security guard greeted her with a nod. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Zeta's warm voice echoed through the empty lobby. "You're on time, that's good. Shall we begin?" The next few hours were a revelation for Valentina. She accompanied Mrs. Zeta in her morning routine, preparing coffee, organizing meeting rooms, checking cleaning supplies. Manual, repetitive, work that required attention to detail and constant dedication. "Every cup of coffee I serve has a little love in it," Mrs. Zeta explained, as she taught Valentina how to operate the industrial coffee machine. When people come in early tired, a well-made coffee can change their day. By 7 a.m., the first employees began to arrive. Valentina noticed the surprised looks as they saw her serving coffee alongside Mrs. Zeta. Some whispered among themselves, others smiled discreetly. But it was the reaction of a young intern that struck her deeply. "Thank you so much," the girl said as she received her coffee, looking directly into Valentina's eyes with genuine gratitude. At that moment, something shifted within her. How many times had she taken her coffee without even looking at the person serving it? How many thank yous had she saved over the years? At lunchtime, exhausted but strangely satisfied, Valentina was surprised by Gabriel, who appeared in the staff cafeteria. "How was your first morning?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of water. "Different," she replied honestly. "I never imagined how much work goes on before the workday even begins." Gabriel smiled, sitting down at the simple table where she was resting. "You know, Valentina, when I started here as an intern, my father, who was the CEO at the time, made me go through every department in the company. He said, 'You can't lead what you don't know.'" "Your father was the CEO?" Valentina asked, surprised. "But then why did I spend the last few years in the field?" he completed. "Because he also taught me that our greatest strength lies in our roots. Not just the roots we plant in the soil, but the roots of values that sustain everything we build." Their conversation was interrupted by a group of employees coming in for lunch. Valentina watched as Gabriel greeted each by name, asked about their families, and showed genuine interest in their lives. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of discoveries. After the cafeteria, Valentina was assigned to different departments: archives, storage, reception. In each place she met people with unique stories, impressive dedication, and a wisdom that couldn't be learned in MBAs. In the storage room she met Mr. Joe, who had created an organizational system so efficient it halved the time spent searching for materials. At the reception she worked with Marina, a young mother who attended night school and dreamed of growing within the company. But it was in the archives that she had her biggest revelation. Among folders and old documents, she found records of Maxwell's early years. Black and white photos showed the founders, including Gabriel's father, alongside employees at company gatherings and events. "This was at Maxwell's first year-end party," a voice said behind her. It was Gabriel looking at the photos with a nostalgic gaze. "My father insisted on serving the barbecue himself. He said a true leader serves before being served." Valentina looked at the photo with new eyes. The man serving the plates, with a sincere smile on his face, was indistinguishable from the other employees. There was no pomp, no hierarchical distance, just people celebrating together. "Your father seems to have been an incredible man," she commented, feeling genuine admiration. "He was," Gabriel agreed, and there was something in his voice that made Valentina look at him. Their eyes met, and for the first time she saw beyond the CEO, beyond the man in the straw hat. She saw someone who carried a legacy of true values, someone who genuinely believed in the power of humility and respect. That night, returning home, Valentina didn't turn on her state-of-the-art TV or check her social media. She sat on her balcony, watching the city lights, and for the first time in a long time allowed herself to question her own choices. Her phone rang. It was her younger sister, with whom she hadn't spoken in months due to a silly argument over their parents' inheritance. Before, she would have ignored the call, but something had changed. "Hi, Anna," she answered, her voice softer than usual. "I was just thinking about you." The conversation that followed was the first step in a long-needed reconciliation. As she spoke with her sister, Valentina realized that her transformation went beyond the professional environment. It was affecting every aspect of her life. What she didn't yet know was that her biggest challenge was yet to come. The following week, Gabriel would announce a trip to Maxwell's farms, and Valentina would discover that her greatest lessons were still ahead. The countryside, with its simplicity and wisdom, held secrets no MBA course could teach, and her heart, already in the process of transformation, would find even deeper reasons to change. The sun hadn't yet risen when Maxwell's van left Chicago for the countryside. Valentina, sitting next to Mrs. Zeta, watched the urban landscape gradually transform into green fields. Gabriel was driving the vehicle himself, refusing the offer of a professional driver. "The first farm we're visiting is special," he explained, glancing in the rearview mirror. "It's where it all began 40 years ago. My father bought that land when no one believed anything prosperous could grow there. After 3 hours of driving, they turned onto a dirt road. The Maxwell logo, discreet yet imposing, marked the entrance to the property. Workers waved as they recognized the van, and Valentina noticed that everyone smiled when they saw Gabriel. "Mr. Carl," Gabriel called, getting out of the vehicle to hug a man with skin weathered by the sun. "How's the family?" "All good, Mr. Oliver. The granddaughter you helped bring to the hospital is already running around causing trouble." Valentina watched, fascinated. As Gabriel interacted with each person, there was no excessive formality, just mutual respect and genuine interest. It was the same man who led one of the country's largest companies, but here, among the rural workers, he seemed even more at ease than in his executive office. "Come on," he called the small group. "I want to show you something." They walked through the fields until they reached an area where young seedlings were being cultivated. There, Gabriel stopped and crouched down, picking up a handful of soil. "This is the heart of Maxwell," he said, letting the soil sift through his fingers. "It's not the buildings in Chicago, not the machines or the numbers on spreadsheets. It's this land and the people who cultivate it with love." Valentina felt something different in the air. It wasn't just the scent of damp earth or the gentle breeze swaying the leaves. It was a sense of belonging, of connection to something greater than herself. 20 years ago, Gabriel continued, my father brought me to this exact spot. I had just graduated with a degree in business administration, full of theories and spreadsheets in my head. He picked up a handful of this same soil and told me, "Son, you can have all the diplomas in the world, but if you don't understand that every grain of this soil carries a story, you'll never be a true leader." His eyes met Valentina's, and she saw in them a mix of emotion and determination. It was also here that he told me about his illness, and it was here that I promised him I would keep alive not just the business, but the values he built. The group moved on to a simple lunch prepared by the farm workers. The rustic table, covered with a checkered tablecloth, was laden with homemade dishes. Valentina, who usually dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, discovered she had never tasted food so flavorful. During the meal, the workers shared stories. Mrs. Zeta revealed that she had started at Maxwell as a coffee picker and that Gabriel's father had personally encouraged and financed her education. "Mr. Oliver is just like his father," she commented, her eyes misty. "He has the same heart." In the afternoon, as they observed the harvesting process, Gabriel surprised everyone by taking off his jacket and helping with the work. Valentina, after a moment of hesitation, followed his example. Her delicate hands, accustomed only to typing on a laptop, learned the weight and value of manual labor. By the end of the day, exhausted but strangely happy, Valentina sat on a rustic wooden bench to watch the sunset. Gabriel approached, offering her a cup of coffee prepared by Mrs. Zeta. "You know, Valentina," he began, sitting beside her, "when we met that day in Chicago, I saw something familiar in you." "What?" she asked, curious. "I saw the same arrogance I had at 25, the same certainty that success was measured by titles and appearances." Valentina smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. "And what made you change?" "Besides my father's lessons," he chuckled softly. "It was understanding that every person who crosses our path has something to teach us. The security guard, who greets us in the morning, the cleaning staff who take care of our space, the farmer who grows the food that reaches our tables. Everyone has a story, a dignity that deserves respect." The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It was a different view from the sunsets Valentina usually saw from her penthouse in Chicago. "Gabriel," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not firing me that day. For looking beyond my arrogance and giving me a chance to learn." He smiled, a smile that warmed something inside her. "Thank my father. He's the one who taught me that sometimes people just need an opportunity to rediscover their own humanity." At that moment, with the sky ablaze and the scent of earth in the air, Valentina felt her heart grow lighter. The past few weeks had changed not just her professional outlook, but her very essence as a person. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a reminder of an important meeting in Chicago the next day. But for the first time, the numbers and goals seemed less important than the present moment. "I think I finally understand," she said, more to herself than to Gabriel. "What?" "That Maxwell's true marketing doesn't need to be created in an agency. It already exists here, in the stories of these people, in the way the company treats every employee like family." Gabriel nodded, satisfied. "You've just understood what took me years to learn." The return to Chicago the next morning was different from the trip out. Valentina was no longer the same person who had left the city the day before. In her heart, beyond the professional transformation, something new had been born, a feeling she wasn't yet ready to name, but one that had Gabriel's face and the scent of Maxwell's soil. When she arrived at her apartment, the first thing she did was remove all the framed photos showcasing her professional achievements. In their place, she put up the photo Mrs. Zeta had taken at the farm, her with soil on her hands and a genuine smile on her face, standing beside Gabriel and the workers. It was the beginning of a new phase in her life. A phase where success would be measured not by the numbers in her bank account or the labels in her wardrobe, but by her ability to positively touch the lives of those around her. And as for Gabriel, well, that would be another story. A love story that would begin not in boardrooms or corporate events, but in the green fields of Maxwell, where a city executive learned that the greatest life lessons sometimes come wrapped in a worn straw hat and a serene smile.